Sean Beckwith received a disturbing message from his daughter Lee. She was in trouble. So far, the man had only found her car at an impound lot, but there were no other traces or leads. The search was further complicated by the fact that Lee disappeared in the infamous Mexican city of Juarez. Sean contacted the police, but when he returned to the impound lot, the car was gone. Apparently, someone had noticed him and moved it. The officer suggested that Sean probably made a mistake. After all, people often come here looking for missing relatives and always blame the Mexicans. Now, Sean was escorted back to the border so he would not get in the way of the local cops. Sean returned to Texas, to his family ranch. At home, his wife and younger daughter were waiting, but he could not bring them any good news. He spent the rest of the day racking his brain trying to figure out what to do next. He and his wife would never have allowed their daughter to go to Mexico, which meant Lee had run away with her friends behind their backs. Susan asked her husband not to give up, although at that point she still did not know that Lee had disappeared in Juarez and that the police were working with the kidnappers. Sean was soon visited by his old war buddy Max Voyden. Sean had tried to reach out to the consul, but no one ever returned his calls. Max suggested grabbing that cop and beating the necessary information out of him. But for now, Sean and the father of the other missing girl went to the consulate. Unfortunately, this was a typical situation for Juarez. Just last fall, 30 American citizens and several hundred Mexicans went missing in the city. Local authorities were tied to the cartel, so very few people were ever found. 6 months ago, the newly appointed police chief was shot along with his entire family, so the cops now preferred money over a bullet to the head. If no ransom was being demanded for the girls, it meant they were going to be turned into slaves and sold for money. The cartel called mercenarios is made up of former military men, and no one has been able to deal with them. The story of Lee and Billy was covered in the news. What was supposed to be a party trip to Juarez turned into a disappearance of 2 young women. One of their fathers is a colonel, a decorated Marine, and he and his wife are certain their daughter did not just run away. The heartbroken parents held a press conference which was watched by the cartel's leader, Hector Garza. There was a problem and it needed fixing. The gang had already captured 2 corrupt cops and tied them to chairs in some basement. These officers had personally abducted the American girls as a gift for Hector. The girls are hot, the boss admitted, but one of them had a father who was a former Marine and he was openly threatening them. One cop got his brains blown out. Hector ordered Carlos to use the tunnels to get into the US and contact their inside man. That man would dig up everything about this colonel. Manto was tasked with making amends and bringing back the foreigner's head. If they dealt with the Marine, it would send a message to everyone else. You do not get to threaten their cartel in front of the whole country. Armed men in 3 vehicles crossed the US border in secret and met up with the American working for the cartel. He had already cut off communications, so the colonel would not be able to call for help. At that moment, Sean grabbed his rifle to shoot at the coyotes that had wandered onto his property. In the distance, he spotted a signal jammer. On the other side of the ranch, there was another one. They had been placed all around the perimeter. No wonder the horses had been so agitated during the night. And now, the vehicles with the bandits appeared. Sean ran to the house and fired a shot into the air to warn his family. One of the Mexicans opened fire with an automatic weapon, making it clear that the family was in danger. Sean took him out with a precise shot to the head. Susan tried to call the police, but there was no signal. After firing a few more shots, Sean took cover inside the house. He told his wife to get the pistol from his office. The bandits got out of the vehicles. Sean peeked out and shot another one, blowing his head off. The rest of them riddled the house with bullets. The family was unable to reach the police, but the sound of repeated gunfire was heard at a nearby ranch. Closest of all was Sheriff Riggins, who received the signal and immediately drove to the address. The cartel members really did operate like a military unit. They were not ordinary criminals. One of them grabbed an axe and broke down the door, but was instantly thrown back by a shot to the chest. As the first group entered, the second moved toward the house as well. They had orders to block all exits. About 10 gunmen began searching the house while Carlos stayed back. He was not in a hurry to risk his life. The enemy could not be underestimated, especially when it was a former soldier, a man who had spent his entire life killing. The mother and daughter hid in a closet just before a shotgun-wielding thug entered the room. He fired several shots, but the women ducked just in time, and Susan shot the Mexican in the head. Sean had wisely scattered dishes on the floor. 2 of the intruders stepped on them and gave themselves away. The Marine immediately took them out. Another pair followed shortly after. Carlos decided it was time for everyone to move in, including the cowardly cop Manto. Sean rushed into the room where his family was hiding. There, he armed himself with the rifle of one of the dead attackers. Carlos first sent the terrified cop upstairs. Another man in a mask went with him and was instantly shot dead. Several more rushed into neighboring rooms and opened fire on the family, but Sean outmaneuvered and eliminated them. He ordered his wife and daughter to climb out the window into the yard. On that side of the house, there was no one left. Carlos spotted the cowardly cop and ordered him to fight as well. The man reluctantly moved forward until he found himself staring down the barrel of a rifle. At that moment, a police car pulled up onto the ranch property. The sheriff saw the bodies and tried to call for backup, but his radio mysteriously did not work. One of the gunmen was waiting outside. He held his fire until Riggins got closer, then opened up on the sheriff. Sean took advantage of the distraction and took out a couple more of the bandits. The Mexican riddled the police car with bullets, but the sheriff had already gotten out and took him down. Carlos threw a grenade onto the second floor. Sean jumped out of the window and rejoined his family, who were waiting outside. The gang shifted their attention to the sheriff. The poor guy only had a shotgun against the cartel's heavy arsenal, but he held his ground to the end. Sean led his family into the garage, then ran back to the battleground with a pistol. He came up behind the bandits and shot down half of them. Unfortunately, the sheriff was also killed. Susan drove out of the garage and picked up Sean. The family finally managed to leave the ranch. Carlos and the remaining men followed them. They nearly caught up to the pickup truck. A gunman tried to shoot the driver, but Sean kept swerving the vehicle left and right. He asked Susan to hand him the pistol and slammed the brakes, then got out and shot up the cartel's vehicle point blank. All of them were killed, except for Carlos, who fell out of the car. He began saying disgusting things about Sean's family, so Sean shot him in the legs. The father began interrogating the bandit, and Carlos finally broke. He admitted that the girls had been kidnapped by a police officer, and they were a gift for his brother, Victor. Having learned the cartel boss's location, the Marine finished Carlos off. He transferred his family into the cartel's vehicle and told them to head somewhere safe. He himself set off to rescue his elder daughter. It was time to ask Max for help. Max had already managed to photograph Victor Garza's base. Max showed up with an entire arsenal, hoping they would not be searched at the border. The former soldiers easily crossed into Mexico without any trouble. Sean imagined the horrors his daughter might have endured over the past week. That evening, the friends arrived at Victor Garza's mansion. The cartel boss was furious. No one knew where his brother was. Inside the building, there were about 10 people. Another 50 belonged to the quick reaction group. That meant they had about 10 minutes before an army showed up. The former Marines began their sweep. First, they quietly took out the guards. Then, they entered the building and eliminated 3 more. Sean moved a bit too quickly and opened fire on some Mexicans who were too far away. A gunfight broke out. The head of security, Eduardo, told the boss to hide. Victor immediately called for reinforcements, but it was too late. Another group of fighters was sent to the afterlife, followed by Eduardo himself. The quick reaction force turned out to be not so quick, and now there was no one left to save Victor from Max. He tried to bribe the soldier, but Sean appeared from around the corner. Victor realized bribery would not work, and the Marine lunged at him, smashing the face of the feared cartel leader to a bloody pulp. "She's alive." Victor groaned through pain and tears. Lee is being held outside the city. He agreed to show them the way. The soldiers stopped near a house. Victor demonstrated a special knock. Sean repeated it, but in response, bullets tore through the door. He tossed in a flashbang grenade and shot everyone inside, sparing only one guard. That man pointed to the room where the girls were kept and was then killed too. Sean finally found his daughter and her friend, dirty and exhausted. The girls lay on the floor. They could hardly believe someone had come to rescue them. Sean helped them into the car, while Max stayed behind to play with Victor and his knife. He left the cartel boss's head beside an altar in the middle of the street. Sometime later, Lee returned to her normal life, though it was unlikely she would ever forget what she had endured in Mexico. That's the end of the movie. Thank you for watching until the very end.